Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Feds, where we empower you, the American citizen, to stand strong for truth and take action even when you feel alone. I am Stephanie Weidel. Before we begin, please head on over to our Rumble and YouTube channels and start following us so you can stay up to date. Please share our podcast and visit our website to join us in our mission of protecting Americans from government overreach and holding the government accountable, all from the inside. Go to fedsforfreedom.org. Recently, Feds for Freedom joined with Virginia Medical Freedom Alliance to host the second Medical Freedom and the Constitution Summit at Patrick Henry College in Purcellville, Virginia. Today, we are airing one of those summit presentations highlighting award-winning investigative journalist Alex Newman. I encourage you to watch on Rumble and YouTube, as Alex's slides are phenomenal. In this episode, Alex Newman exposes how the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and global elites are waging a coordinated war for control of the next generation using schools, media, and international policy. Alex warns that if we lose our children, we lose everything. He calls on parents, pastors, and the American citizen to pull their children from corrupt institutions, rebuild classical education rooted in truth, and fight back before the next generation is lost to global indoctrination. I hope you enjoy this episode.
Thank you very much. It's a tremendous honor to be here. Really appreciate all of you coming and all that you guys do for our country. When Sheila asked me what I wanted to talk about, I said, well, the same thing I always want to talk about, what they're doing to our children, because it's the most important issue. And the reality is all these other issues revolve around what I'm going to share with you today. The attacks on our medical freedom, the attacks on all of our freedoms run right through the hearts and minds of our children. And at this point, they're very bold. They don't even consider them our children. They consider them their children. So we're going to look at some of what they're up to. But first, some important instructions on how you fold a UN flag, right? You take it like this, and you go like that. And then once you're done, you chuck it in the trash can, right where it belongs, okay? They richly deserve it. They really do. And I want to start with a verse out of Proverbs. This is from 27, verse 12. It says, "The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty." Folks, let's not be the simple. Let's recognize that there is massive danger on the horizon. Maybe we have 3.5-year reprieve right now, and praise the Lord for that. But the totalitarians are coming. They haven't given up. They will not give up ever. The price of liberty, as our forefathers said, is eternal vigilance, and they will be back with a vengeance just as soon as they can. And I want to start, because we're dealing with medical freedom, I want to start with what they are doing through the school system. Some of you might have heard of these new full-service community schools. Sounds really nice. They say they're going to deal with the whole child and the whole family and the whole community. What this is an effort to replace parents. I actually call them parental replacement centers. And if you can read their own documents. The federal government is funding these and has been since 2015, when Republicans gave Obama what he described as a Christmas miracle. And they say school is not anymore just about educating children. And of course, it hasn't been that for a long time. Now they're going to deal with the mental health and the dental health and the nutritional needs and everything else about your children. You can still do the bedtime stories if you behave yourself, but that'll be the extent of it if these totalitarians get their way. And when I say they're turning your schools into medical clinics, I mean that in the most serious sense possible. They are transing your children in schools under the guise of mental health and physical health. They're putting them on puberty blockers. They're getting children ready for castration. The UN is very open about this. They want all schools to be vaccine distribution centers where they track your vaccine status, not just for all the COVID boosters. There'll be plenty more where those came from. And the World Health Organization, I call it the World Homicide Organization, is determined that this is going to happen in every school on planet Earth. And by the way, they just released a new report a few days ago, UNESCO did, saying homeschooling, if it's going to be allowed at all, is going to be entirely under the control of government. They said the state remains the duty bearer on education, which is, of course, a lie from the pit of hell. Parents are the duty bearers when it comes to education. And if we choose to delegate some of that, that is our prerogative. Now, I've watched this happen, so I knew where all of this was going a long time ago. My wife is Swedish, so I lived in Sweden for many years. And I was there in 2010 when the Swedish government passed the Education Reform Act. They said all the private schools taking public money will henceforth teach the government curriculum at every step of the way. Bibles will be banned, prayer will be banned, and everybody will do what we say, including teaching kindergartners that they might have been born in the wrong body. Mind you, this is way before the insanity hit the United States. And they started kidnapping homeschooled children. Absolutely crazy. This little boy right here, he was homeschooled, and his parents had not given him all of the recommended injections. And so the state stepped in and kidnapped him. They dragged him off a plane. Armed police officers dragged him off an airplane as his parents tried to leave for India, where the mother was from, so they could continue homeschooling in peace. And I called the education ministry. I got a call from Mike Donnelly at HSLDA. He was their director of international affairs at the time. He said, Alex, they're attacking homeschooling in Sweden. You're a journalist. Could you write something about it? Okay. My first son had just been born. I wasn't quite a homeschooler yet, although we were. And I said, okay, yeah, sure. And as I started digging, it was terrifying. I called the education ministry. Hey, what's going on? What are you guys doing to these poor homeschool families? Oh, well, all children have a human right to education. I'm pretty sure they're being educated by their parents. And actually, the data shows homeschooled children do way better on average on academics and on social and on everything else. What do you mean? Oh, no, all children have, it's like a broken record. All children have a human right to government indoctrination. So here are some before and after pictures. That's the last picture of him before the government kidnapped him. Right there on the left, you see pre-kidnapping. On the right, you see post-kidnapping. He just aged out of the foster care system. Parents never got him back. True story. Yep. Here's some other families that were ruthlessly persecuted by the regime in Sweden. And they do a lot of the testing for their weird policies in Sweden, because what happens in Sweden typically stays in Sweden. Not a lot of people outside of Sweden speak Swedish. And so, if they kidnap a bunch of homeschool kids, terrorize families, brutalize innocent people, not a lot of people outside of Sweden will figure out about it. So I knew then that this would eventually spread. And of course, that's what's coming to America if we're not very careful. To show you how dishonest the leftists are, I showed this slide at a talk I gave for Moms for Liberty, and the fake news said, oh my goodness, the speaker at Moms for Liberty is quoting Hitler. Just to be clear, I'm trying to show you that this evil ideology from the pit of hell, that the government should raise and educate and decide how children learn, has been responsible for massive atrocities. So I quote this man so that you understand how dangerous these ideas are. But they're here.
Never invested as much in public education as we should have, because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families, and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Once it's everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we start making better investments.
Yeah. MSLSD, I think they renamed it now, but they're telling you to your face, right? During the Obama administration, they put out this policy document saying parents could be equal partners with the government in the raising of their own children. And as you read this, you'll find out very quick you don't get to be an equal partner at all. You'll do what the government says, and if you don't like it, well, then we'll do some mandatory parenting classes, and if you still don't like it, we'll take your children from you, okay? Here's the Secretary of Miseducation for 7 years under Barack Obama.
There's certain kids we should have 24/7 to really create a safe environment and give them a chance. I think all of our schools should be community centers. Our schools should be open 12, 13, 14 hours a day with a wide variety of after-school.
Yeah, see, parental replacement centers. And they're very open about this. Here's a little discussion in the U.S. Senate between a senator and the last Secretary of Miseducation under Joe Biden.
Fairly quick answers here because I want to get to Secretary Becerra. Do you think parents should be in charge of their child's education as the primary stakeholder?
I believe parents are important stakeholders, but I also believe educators have...
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not a stakeholder in the education of my children. My wife and I are in charge of the education of our children, and that's not negotiable, okay? Here's Beijing Biden.
Look, these aren't, we always talk about these children. They're not someone else's children. They're our children.
Yeah, no, they're not, Biden. Stop sniffing the children. They are not your children, okay? And they double down on this stuff. Here's Secretary Miguel Cardona. He says teachers know what's best for the kids because they're with them every day. Yeah.
Rebecca put a teacher's creed into words when she said, there's no such thing as someone else's child. No such thing as someone else's child. Our nation's children are all our children.
No, They're absolutely not, all right? Again, this is not negotiable. But they think your children and your grandchildren are their children. And they think they're going to make all the decisions about what injections they're going to take, what medicines they're going to take, what surgical procedures they're going to undergo, what they're going to be taught, when they're going to be taught it, and if you are allowed to have any influence at all. Now, some of the crazy things that they are pushing on them right now, this idea that abortion, killing your baby, is a human right. They've got all kinds of international agreements that claim this, including the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Says states must decriminalize abortion to ensure that girls have access to safe abortions. There are no safe abortions, by the way. There's always at least one individual who dies. Here's the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. Abortion is a human right. We'll get into this, what they mean by that. They actually harassed and terrorized the Dominican Republic for not allowing abortion on demand. They said the state must modify its legislation to guarantee access to safe, legal, and effective termination of pregnancy. And by guarantee access, they mean taxpayers need to pay for it, too. Okay. In China, they like to pretend like they're pro-choice. They got caught in communist China helping this mass-murdering dictatorship forcibly abort children as part of their population control policies. And this came out in Congress. Back in 2010, the Vice Minister for the National Population and Family Planning actually thanked the United Nations for, and I'm quoting, its constant support to China's population and family planning undertakings during the past 30 years and more. These are some brutal, ruthless people. This is the former UN LGBT czar, is a guy from Thailand, Vivit Muntab Horn, and he actually was quoted in the Argentinian press giving an interview saying, we got to get the children the LGBT propaganda as early as possible. He says the younger the better, because then their attitudes haven't been fully formed yet. Here's some dolls that the UN thinks your boys ought to have. Here's the UN Secretary General celebrating Harvey Milk. Don't know if you know Harvey Milk. It's a weird guy to celebrate. He was a child predator. He was raping boys, some of whom went on to kill themselves. Secretary General said he's the first guy to unleash the sexual revolution and the homosexual revolution in America. They want your children to learn all about it. Harvey Milk Foundation honored Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And it's ironic that they're going to protect our children. If you look at their UN peace troops, they're famous around the world for one of the most ghastly crimes you can imagine. Using their own data, estimates from the UN itself suggest that about 60,000 women and children were raped by UN peacekeepers just in the last decade. Okay. You don't want these people anywhere near your children. They continue to teach nonsense to the children. They actually dispatched their UN special rapporteur on the human right to education, a Pakistani lady named Farida Shahid, and she had some very nasty things to say about our country. She said, how dare Trump suggest that the federal government ought not be running all the schools? We need more federal control, not less. She says Florida and Texas are in the wrong. How dare they try to protect children from books with obscene, pornographic, disgusting, filthy material in it? That's a violation of their human rights. True story, you can read the report. Book bans, content restrictions, they silence marginalized voices. Nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. In a sane world, people who give obscene material to children would go to jail. And all 50 states have laws on the books prescribing criminal penalties for people who give obscene material to children, unless it's a government school. True story. She also said that private schools must come under the control of these maniacs, and she says that the state and the federal government must determine that education is a human right. We'll come back to why this is so significant. The UN means something very different than we do when we talk about human rights. It says we need to ratify a whole bunch of UN agreements, and they've been at this for a long time. 1990, the UN determined that the basic learning needs and the basic learning content required by all human beings is a common and universal responsibility. In other words, it's not the parents, it's not the school board, it's not even your state or your Supreme Court. It's a UN responsibility. And they said that all the children need the same standards of learning, which is where they're going with this. In 2000, they said schools must change the attitudes and values of children. And so let's stop on this idea of human rights for a moment. See, in America, human rights, this idea comes from the Bible. Our founding fathers also called it a self-evident truth, which it is. God gave us rights. God said, thou shalt not murder, therefore you have a right to life. God said, thou shalt not steal, therefore you have a right to property. God said government must punish evil. In fact, that's the purpose of government. Therefore, government must punish those who try to infringe on your right to life or property or liberty, right? This is common sense. Everybody at the founding era understood this. The UN means something very different. And all you got to do is read their own documents to figure this out, right? They have their foundational human rights document is the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, and I encourage you to read it. The Soviet Union wrote big parts of it, so you probably won't be surprised when you see what's in there. Article 26 claims that education shall be compulsory. Can you imagine our founding fathers saying we're going to enforce your rights by pointing a gun at you and forcing you into an institution where we're going to teach your children things? It's self-evidently ludicrous. They also say in Article 26 that education shall further the activities of the United Abominations. Go read it yourself. I mean, United Nations, sorry. Always get that wrong. What does that mean? I've got 6 children, praise the Lord, so far. The UN doesn't like that. They say they're climate criminals, too much CO2 emissions, which makes me smile. But what does that mean? I don't teach my children to further the activities of the United Nations. In fact, I teach them the truth about the United Nations. That it's a wicked, vile organization that ought to be dismantled. It's run by dictatorships and mass murderers and kleptocrats. You know what that means? I'm depriving my children of their human right to a compulsory education that furthers the activities of the United Nations. Just read the text of the thing. It's right there in your face. You can read the new report that they just released last week about homeschooling, where they say homeschooling must be governed by international human rights law. And they're not kidding. Okay. If you read Article 29 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you'll find out that none of your rights and freedoms, and I'm quoting word for word, may be used contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. True story. Can you imagine the First Amendment? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, your freedom of speech, whatever, unless Congress doesn't like your speech, in which case we'll throw you in jail. It'd be totally nonsensical. And yet the UN claims these are your human rights. Government gives you privileges, the UN gives you privileges that can be revoked at will, and don't even think about using them contrary to the purposes and principles of the UN. This is what they mean when they talk about human rights, and we need to understand that. They're going for a one-world government. They've been doing it for a long time. They call it the New World Order. You've probably seen your top politicians on TV talking about it. George Soros can give you some insight into where all this is going.
So I think you need a new world order that China has to be part of the process of creating it, and they have to buy in. They have to own it the same way as, let's say, the United States owns the Washington Consensus, the current order.
All right, just so we're clear, the most murderous dictatorship in all of human history needs to own the New World Order, kind of like the United States owned the previous one. How many people think that's a good idea? Right? This is a government that has literally slaughtered 100 million of its own people if you don't count the forced abortions to enforce the population control policy. If they'll slaughter 100 million of their own, what in the world do you think they'll do to you? Okay. You don't want to find out, trust me. Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum agrees.
I respect China's achievements, which are tremendous over the last over 40 years since the opening up and policy and reform policy came into action. I think it's a role model for many countries.
Yes, a role model where we murder the people who disagree with us. What a good idea if you're a psychopath, right? Folks, these are the people guiding policy around the world, with the possible exception of big swaths of the U.S. government for now. Right? They've got their little 2030 agenda. They call it the Master Plan for Humanity, and I imagine God had a real good chuckle about that. Here's the Secretary General. He says the UN General Assembly is the parliament of humanity. Now, if you read these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the Master Plan for Humanity, you'll get a good sense of where it's going. Think China, but at the international level. Right? We're going to redistribute your wealth, they say in goal number 10. We're going to make changes in the way our societies produce and consume goods. Karl Marx, please pick up the red phone. Right? How are you going to do that? Well, by controlling the means of production, of course. This is straight in the text of an international agreement signed by every government in the world, including yours. Okay? If you go into the preamble, we're committed to ensuring universal access to sexual and reproductive health care services, which means abortion, of course, and sex education. Goal number 3, we're going to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all ages. Again, abortions for everybody, mental health for everybody. This is the head of climate at the World Homicide Organization. I ran into her in Azerbaijan last year. She's got some crazy things to say, but in the interest of time, we're going to skip over it. But you might have heard of this One Health thing, right? One Health is the World Health Organization's new policy idea. And what they're arguing is that human health is also completely interrelated with environmental health and with animal health. And so now we're going to consider all of them together. You're just one more organism on this planet, like a cockroach or a bacteria. And so now all of it needs to be determined together. Now, this isn't just a collectivistic, communistic way of thinking where public health trumps individual rights. They're actually making the argument explicitly that environmental health and environmental rights trump individual rights as well. Animal rights. As we speak, they're right now trying to give human rights to rocks and rivers and things like this. They're doing it in some places. Unborn babies don't have human rights, but rocks and rivers do. I saw this on the beach close to my house. You know, they've got the little sign to protect the turtles. It says, if you mess with these turtle eggs, you're going to jail for at least 1 year. Oh, interesting. I like turtles. Don't get me wrong. I think turtles are great. But if you want to murder your baby, we'll give you a nice tax subsidy. How is it that the little turtles have that kind of protection, but not the baby humans? It's because these people are inhuman to the core. Number 5 in their little Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda, gender equality, which, again, abortion. When they say gender equality, you need to understand they don't mean what we think they mean, right? They don't mean like men and women have equal rights, we get to own property and work and things like that. No, they mean destroy the family, abortions for everybody, etc. And they have this 3-legged stool approach. The first leg of the stool, this is their term, is the government. So the UN comes together and comes up with these agreements like the 2030 Agenda. The second leg of the stool is the economic side, the private sector, the companies of the world, which is where the World Economic Forum comes in. They bring all the big businesses to the table. In fact, they signed an agreement with the UN in 2019 to become their strategic partner on implementing the 2030 Agenda. You wonder why all of our corporations are going woke, even though they know their customers hate it, their employees hate it? It's because of this. You know who's now the co-chair of the World Economic Forum? Larry Fink, the guy who runs BlackRock, which manages $10 trillion of assets, probably for everybody in this room. Whether it's in your pension, your IRA, your ETF that you bought into, they're using our money to turn our businesses against our freedom, against our children, against our national sovereignty. They also have the, here's Larry Fink, the co-chair of the World Economic Forum, head of BlackRock.
You now make a point of, that's an investment criteria for you.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. 54%.
Oh yeah, they're forcing behaviors, all right. Now they're going for the third leg of the stool, which is the religious sector. Very troubling. The UN actually has what they call the Faith for Earth Initiative. This is one of their little propaganda videos.
85% of the world population believe in a faith or a religion. And the power of that is humongous. And we can harness that in mobilizing faith leaders and faith followers in protecting Earth.
We're going to harness your religion to protect Mother Earth, okay? Here's their page, right? Why Faith Matters. They say the goal of the Faith for Earth Initiative is to collectively achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the Master Plan for Humanity. So if you're seeing this in your church, talk to the pastor. Run, right? I ran into the guy who started this whole thing, just recently departed head of the UN Environment Program. A real Bible scholar, listen.
And so what do you see the role of pastors and priests and bishops and imams in getting their congregations involved in the fight for a sustainable world?
I'm not aware of any religion where nature is not front and center. I mean, look, in the Bible, it starts with God creating this wonderful, beautiful world. After 7 days, he's so happy with what he has created that he takes a day off to celebrate. And the Bible ends with John sitting at a Greek island with a great vision of a flood. So nature's front and center.
I don't know if you guys have read your Bible, but it does not end with a vision of a great flood, okay? Actually, all right, don't get me started. So this Bible scholar wants to tell your church what they should be teaching you about how we save Mother Earth, right? Now, one of the key organizations on this third leg of the stool, it's called Religions for Peace. Until recently, it was funded by USAID, the U.S. State Department, obviously the UN, Rockefeller, Soros, etc. And here's the lady who until very recently was running it. I ran into her in Egypt at the Climate Summit. Listen to what she says here. This is critical.
My name is Azza Karam, and I have the privilege and the responsibility of serving a worldwide movement of interreligious institutions, organizations called Religions for Peace. In case you do not know it, we think of it as the United Nations of Religions. The United Nations has member states or governments. Religions for Peace has member religious institutions, all religious institutions, representing all the religions, representatives from all faith traditions where there are no.
Anyways, that's kind of crazy. I called my pastor, like, Seth, are we part of Religions for Peace? Well, no. Huh. But you just heard her. All religious institutions are part of this United Nations of Religions. What did she mean? Well, if your religion or your denomination is not part of this atrocity, you're not a legitimate religion. You're a cult. You're a sect. And they're pretty clear about this, right? The only ones not welcome are those extremists. And you know what makes you an extremist? Saying that Jesus Christ is the way. You can say he's a way, that's fine. But if you say he's the way, yeah, you don't get to be part of the club. So they're very clear on this. And I watched it firsthand evolve. Right? I'll give you a little bit of insight into this. When I landed in Egypt, I got this report from the UN. This was their Human Development Report. And what they claim in the report is that human evolution produced this ethical and moral code that is no longer adequate for taking care of Mother Earth. And by the moral code, they're talking, of course, about the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments that God gave. And so they say in this report that it's time for new moral codes that will lead people to make different choices and to act differently. And so I get off the plane in Sharm el-Sheikh, and right away I see this big UN poster. I actually took this picture, The Dawn of Conscience. And on there, it's got quotes from a 4,000-year-old pagan Egyptian document called the Declaration of Innocence Before Being Judged Before the Scale of Mat. And it says, I should be allowed into the afterlife because I didn't sin. You know why? Because I didn't pollute the earth or the water. We're redefining sin here, right? Your sin is no longer your murders, your adulteries, your lying, your cheating, your stealing, your idolatry. Your sin is your carbon emissions. But if you pay Al Gore enough money, got some carbon credits, you can assuage your guilt, then maybe we can appease the climate gods for a little while longer. Okay? Now, this is crazy. The idea that carbon dioxide is toxic pollution is preposterous from a scientific point of view. You exhale about 2 pounds of it every single day. Every activity that you engage in, including dying, releases CO2. Human emissions of CO2 make up a fraction of 1% of all the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere naturally. And yet we're supposed to believe that paying taxes to the United Nations is going to make the weather better in 100 years? It's simply ludicrous from a scientific perspective. But from a totalitarian perspective, man, is that clever, right? Everything you do produces CO2. And if CO2 is pollution, then everything you do needs to be controlled, regulated, and taxed. Now, another thing they did at this UN climate summit, they had religious leaders from around the world, all different denominations, and Muslims and Jews and Hindus, and they flew in some pagans from the Amazon rainforest with the headdresses. We're all going to walk up to the top of Mount Sinai, and they unveiled the new and supposedly improved 10 Commandments. There you see them painted green. They did a weird climate repentance ceremony where they begged the climate deities for forgiveness for our steak and our airplane travel and whatnot. And, you know, they didn't know who I was, so I ran into these guys and said, hey, could we do an interview? and thankfully, they didn't know who I was. I said, sure. So here's a little, we did 45 minutes, so you should go watch the whole thing when you have a chance. But here's one of the things that one of the organizers of this told me, James Sternlick, CEO of the Peace Department.
All religions teach us to respect the creation that we have been given. And we've done kind of a terrible job of that. And so with a new kind of 10 Commandments of climate change, which are an addendum to, not a replacement for, the original 10 Commandments, and a third covenant that we're some kind of working on between mankind and creation, that we would refocus on those elements of the teachings from across religions that point us in the direction of fixing the problems that we've created so that life can thrive on this planet and so that we can build that proverbial kingdom of heaven here on earth.
So there you heard it. So it's not just a new and improved 10 Commandments. We're now working on the third covenant, right? God gave us the 10 Commandments. The UN and Friends gave us the new 10 Commandments. God gave us the old covenant, the new covenant. Now the UN and Friends have the third covenant that we're going to use, by the way, to build the kingdom of heaven here on earth. Kind of blasphemous, kind of crazy. But they're doing this out in the open, folks. Their new 10 Commandments are absolutely bonkers, right? We have to serve this interdependent, life-giving earth. Sorry, the earth is a rock. I'm not going to serve the earth. That's ridiculous. We got to change our inner climate. We got to repent and return. We've got to, they said compassion means feeling the cries of Mother Earth. Okay? So here was the head of the UN climate machine back in 2010. And she starts off the climate conference with a prayer. I say, oh, this will be interesting. She says, "Dear Ixchel, please help us weave a creative tapestry of climate solutions to the present crisis." Okay, who is Ixchel? Whip out my laptop. And turns out Ixchel was the Mayan goddess of cannibalism, war, and human sacrifice. So very appropriate. Even the Washington Compost covered this. Right? Cancun talks start with a call to the gods. And they're very open about all of this. And actually, the brainwashing of your children, as I started off with, is the thread that runs through all of this, right? We're the bitter clingers. You remember Obama called us the bitter clingers. We're clinging to our guns, clinging to our Bibles. We're not going for this. So they know that the kids are the key to success here. And so before we had 2030 agenda, we had Agenda 21. This is the UN plan for the 21st century. And CNN fake news said this was a conspiracy theory. So here's Bush, who signed it. Let's see if we can get Bush.
We've signed a climate convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets. We're included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document.
Yep. The leader of the Communist Party fully endorses this in Congress, right?
The Earth Summit.
In interest of time, we'll skip it. But she says, the UN summary says this Agenda 21 requires a profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. Interesting. They say that effective execution means every person on earth is going to have to be involved in this. And again, we're the bitter clingers. They know we're not just going to jump on this bandwagon, so what do? Well, the secret sauce is in chapter 36. They're going to brainwash your kids, and they're telling you so right in the text of the document. It's in chapter 36. Education, or what these maniacs call education, is indispensable for changing people's attitudes. They say it's critical for giving children the right values and attitudes and ethics. They said it needs to include spiritual development. Here's the Agenda 21 book for children that was produced by the UN. It's horrific. I have a copy of it. You see the Hindu deities are all mad because the storks are delivering all these babies. And then on the adjacent page, you read why they're so mad. Turns out the earth groans every time it registers another birth. Right? And right there you have the formula for this whole ideology. Right? What was the very first commandment that God gave to man? Be fruitful and multiply. Right? So what do the clowns teach our children? Oh, Mother Earth is groaning because of your babies. It's total foolishness, right? And then they say, oh, you didn't have babies, so now we need to import 10 billion immigrants. Really? You told us not to have babies. Okay? So children are critical agents of change. Going back to the 2030 agenda, education is goal number 4. All people need to be so brainwashed they will promote this stuff. And then they got the list of things they need to learn. Global citizenship, sustainable development, human rights, gender equality, all those terms that we've already seen. In 2016, they got together. The Global Action Plan for Education declared that education must shape the whole person, including their ethics, their values, and even their spirituality. And I want to give you some insight into what that means real quick. The UN has a whole agency now that's working on this. It's called the UNESCO MGIP. It's the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education on Peace and Sustainable Development. It's in India. Just got back from there a few months ago, and they did not want to talk to me. You probably figure out why in just a moment. But they're very brazen about what they're doing. They're implementing what they call social emotional learning all over the world. Here's the 3 amigos who set it up. Literally, a communist on the left is Irina Bokova, who hates me with a passion. She has smeared me in a bunch of newspapers all through Europe, and I wear that as a badge of honor. Then you got Rosa Utanbayeva, the former dictator of Kyrgyzstan, right there in the middle. And then you've got Dr. Karan Singh on the right. He was the co-chair of the World Commission on Global Consciousness and Spirituality. It's a New Age occult operation within the UN. And they'll tell you what they're doing with social emotional learning. Here's one of their little videos.
Everyone, I come from UNESCO MGIP that is based in New Delhi, and we'll be talking to you today about social emotional learning and how we feel that this is the key to building global citizenship.
It's the key to building global citizenship. And here they told us it was about giving our children empathy. No, it's the key to building global citizenship. And I should point out here what they mean by empathy, right? Because now they have new competencies in the affective domain is how they put it. So now we're not looking at, the child can read a text and understand it. The child knows his multiplication tables. No. Now the new competencies are the child displays empathy. Well, how do you measure that? Well, you put them in some scenarios, right? Maybe there's a person who's on the wrong side of the border and it's kind of poor and, should we open up the border? If you don't think so, you don't have empathy. There's a young lady who, struggling financially, thinking about killing her baby. Do you support her right to kill her baby? No? Oh, well, you don't have empathy. We need an intervention here. You see, they're using this to instill highly controversial, in many cases, blatantly evil ideas in the minds of our children. And I want to show you just... This is some of their propaganda videos. We're going to skip some of it. But they actually brag on CASEL's website, that's the Collaborative for Academic and Socio-Emotional Learning, that they're going to use SEL to develop justice-oriented global citizens. And so I went to the history page. This organization, of course, is funded by Bill Gates of Hell and the Rockefellers and all the rest of the clown car. And they said right on their history page, they took this down after I exposed it, that CASEL and the term socio-emotional learning came from a meeting at the Fetzer Institute. Fetzer Institute is a New Age center of occultism founded by a disciple of Alice Bailey, the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. And this is the leading luminary who's promoting this. Her name is Linda Lantieri.
Courses like this are rooted in social and emotional learning, or SEL for short, a style of teaching that was pioneered by Linda Lantieri.
I did not imagine that I would be living to see some SEL in 92% of the nation's schools.
Oh, it's actually a lot more than that now.
I knew that if we didn't add the spiritual dimension to this work, we were going to leave kids with not all they needed to know. And the Fetzer Institute is really poised right now to step up in supporting this movement.
Fetzer understands that a basic science to establish the natural spirituality of the child presented a blueprint for building a new system of education. The people of Fetzer walk the walk.
All right, so they're going to instill spirituality in your children, right? So where is Linda Lantieri getting her spirituality? I'm glad you asked. Here she is admitting it. Listen.
I'd like to offer some guiding agreements that hopefully we can all agree to in this next hour and a half that we're spending, and they come from one of my teachers who, by the way, showed up at my council table, always does. I hate to say she's passed to another dimension because I have regular communication with her.
She's talking to her spirit friends by her own admission in a Zoom call. Okay. Now, if you go back and read Leviticus, Deuteronomy, you know they're not really spirit friends, they're demons. The Bible calls this an abomination. In Old Testament Israel, the punishment for this was death. It's pretty serious, right? They're very good now at manipulating the attitudes and values of children. And I could show you so many examples of this, but in the interest of time, we're going to have to skip through it. But UNESCO is now promoting not just global sex education standards that are so vile I can't show them to you, but they've got what they call the World Core Curriculum. The guy who wrote it, Robert Mueller, called the father of global education, said it should be taught to every child in every school in every country on the planet. And he admits in the foreword to the teacher's manual that it's based on the teachings of Alice Bailey, who we just met a moment ago, and the Tibetan teacher Javal Kul. And that doesn't mean much to most Americans, but again, Alice Bailey, the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company, should tell you everything you need to know about where these people are going with the so-called education of your children. Now they renamed it the Lucius Trust because Lucifer was just a little too obvious, right? And the Tibetan teacher was a spiritual entity Alice Bailey claimed to be channeling called an ascended master. Now, I know some of you are thinking, that's crazy, and it is, but all of this can be verified by any one of you. Okay, so regardless of what your thoughts are on the Bible and all this is what these people believe. It's what they say they're doing. And so if the World Core Curriculum is based on the rantings of this lunatic and her demon, we ought to know what they say. She wrote a book called Education in the New Age, which I have in my office. It's bonkers. It says we're laying the foundation for the emergence of a new species of human being, a more highly evolved unit. She says we're going to merge all of our minds into a global consciousness, and she says world citizenship should be the goal of the enlightened with a world federation and a world brain. Wow. Interesting, right? And they'll tell you this. Here's the Secretary General of the UN. The purpose of education is global citizenship.
Education must do more than produce individuals who can read, write, and count. It must nurture global citizens who can rise.
So they're not even hiding it anymore, right? Now, Bill Gates of hell in 2004 signed a deal with UNESCO to create global standards, global curricula, global teacher training programs, and the global technology to make it all work.
As a graduating
Then he came back
senior
and started funding what we all know as Common Core. In fact, they bought ads to brag that Common Core was going to line American education up with international standards. If we had more time, I would show them to you. So they are coming for our home schools. They're coming for our private schools. Here's that report I mentioned to you. And so I would urge parents, grandparents, everybody, pastors, we need to understand this is the, in my opinion, primary threat to everything that we hold dear. If they capture the hearts and minds of the next generation, all those other battles we're fighting, we might as well give up now. We're going to lose. You're not going to have medical freedom if they brainwash 85% of the next generation. You're not going to have any freedom, right? Freedoms that we didn't even think were freedoms, as we learned during COVID, will be taken away. No, you can't go to work. No, you can't go visit grandma in the hospital while she's dying. If we lose our children, we're going to lose everything else. And I can't emphasize that strongly enough. Think of the buildings as if they were on fire. And if your children are inside, what do you do when the building's on fire? Well, of course, you write a letter to the school board, obviously. Someone thought that was funny. Right. I imagine some of you have children and you know that's preposterous. If the building's on fire, you hear your children screaming, you smell the flesh burning, you run in the building, even if you die, and you do everything you can to get the child out. Later, you write a letter to the school board. Right? First, you get the kids out. That's what we need to be doing right now as quickly as we possibly can. And then we douse the flames and try to rescue the other kids in there. But we've got to get the kids out. There's a lot of different options once we do that. I'm on the board of the Freedom Project Academy. It's a great school. I serve as a fellow at Classical Conversations. They totally reject the whole scam education system we have. I love how they define the purpose of education is to know God and make Him known. And what you'll find is the children coming out of this program are light years ahead of the victims of government schools. I've got a couple books on this. If you're interested in going deeper on the education subject, my new one is Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, endorsed by the great Pete Hegseth and General Michael Flynn and a lot of other great Americans. I would encourage you all to get involved in political things somehow. If you can't run for office, help somebody run for office. Right? We need decent people at every level. You need good information, or you're going to be misled, and I know you guys have not been. That's why you're here. I'm a senior editor at the New American Magazine. They've got a table out back, the JBS booth. Please check them out. My own newsletters at Liberty Sentinel. The Epic Times is a great publication. We've got some special magazines that we did on this. And I just want to leave you with a few scriptures. God tells us how we are to raise our children. He doesn't say give them over to the government for indoctrination into social-emotional learning and global citizenship and all the rest of it. He said, this is my children's favorite Bible verse, by the way. Papa, you're provoking us to anger. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but what? Bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Okay? It says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's the beginning of knowledge. How much fear of the Lord are they getting in these indoctrination camps? We all know the answer. It's none. Zero. Right? In other words, they're getting no wisdom and no knowledge. So I actually regard this as a Great Commission issue. Right? We cannot honestly say we're fulfilling the Great Commission if we're losing our own children. And I want to just leave you with this, folks, because this is not a political battle. It's actually a spiritual battle. The last time I spoke with Charlie Kirk publicly, he was on my show, and I asked him, what is the threat to America? And he didn't even hesitate. He said, the threat is demonic in its core. I agree 100%. Right? The Apostle Paul tells us in Ephesians 6, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. That's what we're up against, and protecting our children is our first and most important responsibility. So go to Daniel 3 if you want to know how to talk to these people. When they say bow down to the golden idol, you say absolutely not. Thank you, guys, and God bless you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Go check out our website at fedsforfreedom.org, where you can support and become part of our mission. We'll see you next week.